In this tutorial, we're looking at the if statement in JavaScript. This tutorial is going to be really easy for you guys. I think I've made it really clear on how this works. So let's take a look at it. So what is an if statement? Well, an if statement allows the JavaScript interpreter to run some code if something evaluates to true. So if something evaluates to true, like right here, what's inside these parentheses, then it will run this. If this is not true, it will run what's inside this else here. Okay? If there were no else here, it would check if this is true, it's not true, and it would jump out of the if statement. But because we have this else thing here, if this is not true, then we're going to run what's inside the else statement. Okay, let's check it out. So true evaluates to true. If we put the boolean true inside here, this is like the purest form of true. Evaluates to true. There you go. On the flip side, if we put the boolean false inside here, this won't run, but we will run what's inside this else block here. And we can see that. Okay, false evaluates to false. Let's try some other stuff. Here I put the number 1 inside here. Let's see if this is true or not. So if this is true, we're going to run this. Okay, 1 evaluates to true. So as far as these in these parentheses go, 1 and true are the same thing. However, if we put a 0 there, 0 evaluates to false. This is false. We ran this. Okay? Big difference between 1 and 0 inside the parentheses. Well, what happens if we put a 2 there? What's going to happen then? 2 is true. Okay? So as far as numbers go, only the 0 will evaluate to false. We can try a negative number to see what happens with that. Negative 1 is true too. Here I put the string 1 inside here. We haven't created any variable with a value of 1 as a string. We're just putting 1 as a string inside here. We're seeing if it evaluates to true, and 1 as a string is true. Okay, so if we just put a string inside here, it will evaluate to true. We can try it as the string 0 just to make sure. And 0 as a string is true too. Okay, so we can see putting strings in there will give us true. Here I put an expression inside, 3 minus 3. That's going to evaluate to 0. So you can guess what will happen. Expressions like 3 minus 3 evaluate to false, because 3 minus 3 is 0. Here I created a variable, dog. It's set to the string Lassie. And I just put this inside here. You can guess what's going to happen with this too. Okay, dog evaluates to true because it's a string. So we can see that putting a string in here will always evaluate to true. Here we have a variable cat. I haven't given cat a value, and we know that when we create a variable and we don't assign it a value, that its value will be undefined. So what happens when undefined is inside these parentheses? We will see that cat didn't evaluate to true because its value is undefined. So if you put something that's undefined inside these parentheses, it will evaluate to false. We'll run the else statement. Here I have another variable, mouse. It's set to null. Be careful not to write this as null, like with capitals or something. If you want the data type null in JavaScript, it must be in lowercase, like this. So what happens if we put null inside here? Will it be true or false? And mouse didn't evaluate to true because its value is null. So if you put something that's null inside here, it will evaluate to false. We run this. We saw putting strings inside here evaluate to true. But one exception to that is an empty string. And we can see what happens here. Empty strings evaluate to false. Okay, so normally strings are true, but if it's just an empty string, there's nothing inside here, as you can see, it evaluates to false. Here I have one space inside these quotation marks, single quotation marks. Let's see what happens there. And it evaluates to true. So as long as you have one space or whatever in here, it will be true, but an empty string is false. Here I have a variable something, and something is set to 10 minus cat. Okay, remember that cat was undefined. So what happens, like what is something going to be? We do 10 minus undefined. Well, if you do something like 10 minus undefined, it's going to return NaN, which is not a number. Let's check that out. Okay, something has a value of NaN. Alright, so let's put that inside our if statement. And we can see that if you put NaN here, not a number, it will evaluate to false. Here I just created a bunch of variables. Let's check them out. So here, if A is equal to X, then write this out. If it's not true, then we run this. So here we're checking if something is equal to something else. If something is equal to something else, this will evaluate to true. If not, it's false. Okay, let's just look at that. Okay, we can see, so A was 1, X was 1. Okay, if 1 is equal to 1, write this out, okay? And it knows that's true. A is equal to X. This was true. These two guys right here, this stands for AND, okay? So if A is equal to X, okay, now I have to point something out. This is not equals, okay? This is the assignment operator. If we do this, that's, well, right now I won't get too much into that, but this is assigning something, but we're not checking that right now. We're checking if these are equal, and to check if they're equal, we use two equal signs. So if A is equal to X and B is equal to X, then we're going to write this out. So in order for this whole thing to evaluate to true, this has to be true and this has to be true. If one of them is true, one of them is false, this will all evaluate to false. And if they're both false, obviously this is going to evaluate to false. Let's check that out. Okay, they weren't both true, so it's false. This was true, this was false, so this whole thing evaluated to false. And we went down here. Let's look at some more. This double pipe symbol here, if you put two pipes here, this means or. So this means if A is equal to X or B is equal to X, then this will evaluate to true. So now only one of these need to evaluate to true in order for this whole thing to evaluate to true. Let's check that out. Okay, so with the pipes, now it evaluated to true. Because this was true, this wasn't, the whole thing's true. Here we're taking a look at nested if statements. So here we're saying if A is equal to 1, which it is, okay, and then we're going, so if this is true, then we can go inside this block right here. Okay, this is true, so now we're going in here. Now there's a nested if statement. If X is equal to 1, which is also true, then we can output this. Alright, let's check that out. Okay, pretty sure A is equal to X. So what happens if A was equal to 1, but X wasn't equal to 1? Well, what would happen is A would evaluate to 1, so we would go inside here. But if X was not equal to 1, then we wouldn't run this, and we would jump out of the if statement. We wouldn't go to this else, because this first one was true. it would do this, and then it would do nothing inside and jump out. But because this was true and this was true, then we were able to write this out. Alright. Here we're looking at the if and then else if, else if. So there's also else if. Okay, this means if this is true, okay, if this were true, which is not, we would run this and then we would jump totally out of this whole if statement. We would jump out of it. So as soon as this finds one that's true, which is here, it's going to run this and then it's going to jump out. Okay? If all of these were false, then we do the else statement and then we jump out. So let's see what happens here. Oops, we have an error. Let's find out what's going on. Unexpected token on 148. I think that's this. Okay, we're back in business. Alright, it says this will execute because it's the first to evaluate to true. So what happened here was it checked if this was true, it wasn't, went down to this else if statement. Checked if this is true, it wasn't, went down to this else if. This wasn't true, didn't run this, went down to this else if. Checked if this is true, this is true, it ran this, and then it jumped totally out of the if statement down to here. Okay, thanks for listening.